So let me start by welcoming you again. So thank you all for coming, and special thanks to Galeria Plan B for hosting us tonight. This is a collaboration between Arts and Nature Social Club and Galeria Plan B. And for those of you who haven't heard about Arts and Nature Social Club, let me just say a few words. So we were founded in 2019, late 2019, and we've run, I would say, maybe 30 plus events since then. We have a bunch of members here, so if you could maybe just stand up, so if people have questions later on to members of the Arts and Nature Social Club.
We are the bunch.
Please contact or talk to these people. Just very briefly, the underlying idea is to use the arts as a means to sensitize people for environmental issues, sustainability, nature, etc. And we bring together the arts, science and entrepreneurship, and run different kinds of events, mostly salon events with panel discussions. We feature very different speakers, as you can see tonight, from different walks of life and different disciplines. And we love to collaborate with like-minded groups and organizations. And we are a membership-based organization, and obviously are grateful for new people joining us, but first of all, get to know us, join our events, visit our website. And yeah, so Galeria Plan B is hosting us, and Sorana will say a few more words for those who joined us late. But I'm going to say a few words about this panel discussion and the speakers. So most of you joined for the little art tour as well. Zhang is the artist here in the middle, who told us about dark romance, her exhibition, her intentions, how she got inspired by science, biology, how she added form to science, and we will also talk about the exchange, the mutual inspiration between science and arts, and what both areas can learn from each other. And then we have two scientists. To my very right, Professor Dr. Christian Hackenberger. He is a biologist. Biomolecule modification and delivery is his team at the Leibniz Research Institute for Molecular Pharmacology. So that I have to read. That's a mouthful. And then we have Dr. Martin Schwemmle, who is an entrepreneur, founder and CEO of the Future Company. He's also interested in both the arts and the sciences, and will elaborate from his vantage point. So yeah, and this conversation is really what both disciplines can learn from each other, and also what we can do better in adding an artistic perspective to science. But without further ado, handing over to Sorana to say a few more words about Galeria Plan B, and then we'll start the discussion.
Thank you. We are delighted to host this panel discussion at Galeria Plan B. Whether one-to-one or in larger groups, for us it is always important to create dialogue around the artworks that we exhibit, so we are happy to test this Salon format this evening. For those of you that are visiting us for the first time, I already mentioned a little bit during the tour. The gallery was founded 20 years ago in Cluj, Romania by Mihai Pop and Adrian Geier. And since 2009, the gallery has a permanent space in Berlin that is managed by Mihai Pop and Mihaela Luța, who is present here tonight. So if you have more questions after the talk, you are welcome to ask Mihaela. The gallery represents some of the best contemporary Romanian artists, as the program has developed internationally, we bring them in dialogue also with other artists from other cultures. In this regard, Ran is a very good example. As Ran mentioned, we first exhibited her work in a group exhibition in 2019. That was the moment when we discovered her fascinating visual universe and her passion for the microscopic world that she shared with us. 1 year later, we organized her first solo exhibition at the gallery, which attracted Christian's attention, and so their conversation started and is continuing tonight. In the past 5 years, Ran's work has developed from two-dimensional to three-dimensional, as you very well see here in the exhibition. Her material is still the scientific knowledge, more specific visual and motor proteins, as well as eye floaters, but it goes beyond that. It questions the idea of biological knowledge as a fixed truth, exploring the dissonance between what we know and what we feel. In her work, Ran deconstructs scientific representations, blending biology, storytelling, and fiction into a hybrid form. So her work has challenged us to think about the relation between art, nature, and science, thus the collaboration with the Arts and Nature Social Club. In modern times, art and science were defined as opposites. Artists were using intuition, creativity, emotion, while scientists were described as logical and analytical. However, examples from the past, but also recent developments in both fields, are revealing a more complex picture, in which artists and scientists influence and inspire each other. During the Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci was one of the best examples of a remarkable and innovative artist that was also a scientist and an engineer. New discoveries have shown Leonardo's pioneering research into neuroanatomy and neurophysiology based on his experiments on frogs and oxen. The 20th century was a time of extraordinary advancements in science and radical changes in art. Albert Einstein developed his theory of relativity around the same time as Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque invented Cubism. Nowadays, several arts universities, such as Central St. Martin's in London, offer degrees in art and science. Increasingly, the process of creating art and the methodologies of science have become more similar. Both artists and scientists develop their work conceptually. Scientists today no longer start from the observation of nature, but they develop groundbreaking work by thinking what they want to achieve and conceptualizing this through visual elements or digital simulations. Once the expected results are reached, they are then made from real matter and tested in the lab. Similarly, artists start within a conceptual framework based on their experiences, feelings, knowledge, and search for the best mediums to represent their ideas in a personal, impactful way, sometimes even using technology to create their works. This leads me to the first question for tonight. So I suggest that we start from the beginning. Could each of you shortly explain your process of working and how art and science converge in each of your case? Thank you. So maybe we start with Ran. Yeah?
Okay, I'm the first one. So I started this whole art and science. It's actually from 2013 when I used to be a painter. I still consider myself a painter, two-dimensional worker.
Sorry, I think you need to turn it on.
No, is it better? Oh, yes. And then I was painting with just a brush with one hair. But at a certain point, I thought there must be more content in there, and I couldn't see, so I bought a microscope, and that opened the whole Pandora box. And then from the microscope, you look at your thing, and sometimes you have a bottom lighting under your subject, and then the bottom lighting illuminates my eye structure, so I could see my eyelashes projected upside down. I could see my eye floaters for the first time in such enlarged, vivid, detailed situation. So I got a little bit scared. It was like a horror movie. We're not supposed to see through our body. We're supposed to see with the body to whatever out there. So that seeing through as if, your body is in between you, and then you start to have all these questions and what's going on. Then I started to read about the eye floaters, and I started to read about the movement, and the muscles, and then that's when everything started. So I would say I never really made a choice of entering the art and science, but it's just like a natural process. And that situation always reminds me of how life is evolving, how everything is evolving, and you know, everything is the entropy of the previous structure, previous situation. So I think I do have some kind of embedded scientific mind, but not a practice individual. Christian?
Sure.
Okay, so yeah, first of all, thank you for having me here, and hello everybody. Yeah, I should correct you in one point. I'm not a biologist, I'm a chemist, so I'm actually making molecules. I'm making all the same, right? So a scientist, if you're a natural scientist. Yes. So we are interested in the interface between chemistry, biochemistry, also pharmacology in the end. This is why I'm at this Mouthful Institute, this research institute. And my work is, of course, dealing a lot with research, so searching the unknown, which also Heumer von Ditfurth so beautifully described once in an essay, where, of course, the challenge is to identify, first of all, the questions that you want to look at, maybe the research objects, to formulate a hypothesis, and then in our case, really try to prove it by either making new molecules, designing molecules with a certain function. So to put this maybe a little bit away from a very abstract thinking, we are interested in making molecules for drug delivery, for drug targeting, so to maybe also cure some diseases. But it's really all about, sometimes we are also referred to as molecular architects, so building three-dimensional structures and have somewhat a rational way of thinking how we could exploit them, both in material science but also in pharmacology. And so this is why, and this is also what you mentioned, I was fascinated from the beginning when we stumbled upon in your gallery now 5 years ago, when I saw that some of the structures and the illustrations, let's call it like that you are using are actually very close to what we do. And I became very fascinated with the way that you are thinking about this. And although we may have, we will talk about this later, maybe some different point of view or directions, many of them are actually quite close. I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Yeah, also hello from my side, and thanks for the invitation. Let me begin with a story where I discovered the connection points between art and science. So I was doing my PhD in business, and now also that I would say these experiences even hold true today, and I see them also as a founder and, as you said, of the future company. So we're working in the field of future skills. And that story began at an art workshop. So a room full of 20 students, one artist, and every student had a piece of clay in front of them. And, well, we're looking at the clay was looking at us, and we were all looking at the artist asking, tell us what we should do. So we wanted to have a plan. We wanted to have an instruction that told us what we should do with that clay, at best to make a piece of art out of it. And the artist said, well, start touching and feeling the clay. We thought, well, that's a bit weird, but okay, so we start touching and feeling the clay. It was cold, obviously. And then we were looking at the artist again and said, okay, now tell us, what should we build? What should we do? And his answer was, start thinking with your hands. So we started to again touch and feel, and suddenly, and during, I don't know, 1 or 2 hours, something emerged. And the takeaways from that workshop were, let's say, threefold. So the first was what I said, emergence. So you have a thing in mind, you start a process, you decide on clay, whatever, but you don't have a fixed plan how the result should be. Maybe you start with that, but then once you started the journey, you somehow follow the flow. The second, and I'll relate that to research and also to my business experience in a second, the second was the notion of artifacts. So art uses artifacts. The fact that we are in this wonderful space and can look at things is due to the fact that artists create visible elements. And the nice thing is in artifact, there's both art and fact. So actually, it's facts created through art. And well, Heidegger had this wonderful notion of once an idea leaves the artist and is not an idea or a thought anymore, but a piece of art, an object, you can suddenly start conversations. You both as an artist, but also we now discussing and talking about the pieces that we see. And the same with this manifestation of ideas and thoughts that were then the things in front of us. And the third maybe is a notion of emotions. So the task was feel the clay, which reminds me of this, art is not only about conceptual pieces, but it always has and appeals to us not only as rational people, but also as emotional people. And that changed the way I looked at research processes. Because on the one hand, you of course start a research project with hypotheses in mind, you start collecting data with a plan, but the more interesting things happen when you openly look at what you have there. When you look into now, okay, what has happened since I started from that journey, and do I see new patterns? Has something emerged that I did not have in mind? And that was a thing where I thought, okay, wow, and well, also from the research projects, that's led to new findings. Those were not the findings I had in mind at the beginning. I had to start the process with a clear goal in mind, but the cool findings emerged throughout the process. And that's also something that businesses still use today, and that also we include in our work. For sure, you need this intention to start, but then be open and see like what the process delivers. And then second is work with artifacts, which is often graphs, visuals, but also text. So really this like writing text and being surprised and understanding yourself better once you read what you've written. That was something that I also discovered both in research, but also now writing business books. Maybe I'll also leave it here.
Well, thank you for those initial interventions. Ran, you described very nicely how you were kind of struck by, looking at your own eyes and being inspired, but I also wonder, you were born in China, and I'm curious to what extent also culture has informed your experience, and especially given that you've studied in the Netherlands and in Germany, spent some time in Europe, what difference you may see between those cultures. And sometimes one says that China has a more holistic perspective on things, maybe more long-term. Would you say that also had an impact on the way you look at the world as an artist and in general?
Yeah, definitely. I think, I've been in Europe almost, 18 years, I think. So I'm considering myself European 5, like neutral 5. But I born and raised in China, north of China. So I do think that for me, my Chinese part is how I navigate myself in my own universe. Is, I think, for the East Asian way of perceiving the world or reality, is that we never go directly into the point of thing. We go to the peripheries. We go from the around. There's always a detour. The detour is the proper way. The detour is the actual way. It's not that we're afraid to directly get into something, but it's the periphery, the surrounding is what already defines what's inside. So you would have a lot of slowing down processes when you approach to a question or to a task. But I think on the other hand, the European way, and at least the German, the Dutch way, is more direct, is more, you see something, you dive there, and from there, maybe you search for what is needed around you, but you wouldn't spend much energy to go to places that may not necessarily refer that. Maybe you get that later, but you wouldn't consider that from the beginning. But so I think I have both, and that also creates, they are not in a harmony. They are most of the time in a contradiction. So that's why things in me that I over-complex things. I make things complicated. But that means that they never reach to become a statement. They're always there as an open space and to facilitate, to invite. And I think that I feel myself, probably you have the same feeling, that in all the works, that they are not a statement about something, but they are like a registration point, as you say, the artifact. I think I'm really interested in the word artifact also because artifact is, when we are looking for everyone, whatever we do, we always look for the truth, the final goal. But the final goal, even though, say you are a scientist, you get to research the bottom line, but you still feel you cannot reach there. Like me, I make my objects, at the end it's made, but somehow I'm still not there. There's still like, you arrived, but it's never there. Where is it? You always dig the truth, you always dig where it is, and the artifact is just a temporary registration point for you to reach to that somehow final goal. So I see it in that way. So you see, that's again my East Asian logic of seeing things. It's always expanding. It's always the entropy. It's never the beginning.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. And I also wonder about the other two speakers, Christian and Martin, whether you can relate to that from your own cultural vantage point. You mentioned, Martin, you mentioned Heidegger, and also almost described kind of a dualism between looking at the object and then looking back at yourself, whilst the Asian cultures are much more about integration. So maybe you can, both of you can look at kind of the artistic and scientific perspective from that angle as well.
Yeah, well, as I already said, this idea of you create something, and for me it was really working with the artifact of text when we were then writing a paper, and suddenly you start 2 days after you've written a paragraph and you write what you've written, so you see your own artifact, and suddenly you realize, like you get stuck in the process of writing, and then you go back to an earlier paragraph or an earlier page, and suddenly I found sometimes solutions for moments when I was stuck in things that I've written before. And that was something like it felt a bit like magic because I thought, well, that's weird because I've written that text myself. But this is that what was that moment when I thought, okay, but now something like it is all there. I just have to dig into what's already there, and that helps me to move over something that I'm struggling with. I guess that was kind of that experience for me. And I'd be curious after your answer what a detour in your pieces of art was, just to mention that question. But maybe let's first hear Christian, but I'm curious about the detours.
Yeah, we had now these answers before. I was thinking about, of course, the different cultural, historic influences, maybe also the knowledge that in a lot of cases plays a role. But I think one of the big things on the table here, which is also implicit in a lot of your work, is that in my field we have the big advantage of having one universal language. And this is pretty much our ability among all cultures, all nations, to communicate in a given way about what we think about, which is molecules. So we have this way of writing about molecules. You all know the O and the C and the H and bonds and whatever. So that means that regardless whether somebody who grew up in China or in Europe or in Southeast Asia or wherever, once they are familiar with this, they have this idea about what we are talking about. Now, the interesting aspect of this is, of course, then when we think about this as a language, that always we also have different points of view. So, for example, when I look at these structures, I think about how can I make them? What properties do they have? The biologists would look at this completely different and maybe more like the biological function. What do they interact with? So it's pretty much open as any other form of communication, as any other form of text, because you mentioned also text several times. And this is what's for me also in my work, whenever we communicate with other scientists, when we share and when we discuss and neglect certain opinions and say this is completely wrong and I'm right, and so it's all about communication. And the nice thing is that we can always refer to a common point, whether this is now, and this is, I think, something that we will also talk about later, whether this is truth or fake or whatever, because it's nothing else, and the approximation is a completely different story. But that's at least something that I love about my job and what I do, that I can always come back to this element of unity, of common language that we have regardless with whoever I talk about. This is something that is very nice to explore. You wanted to talk about the situation.
I'm just curious if you could share a bit more, like how the detour looked like for one of them.
Yeah, the detour, well, it's, I was just thinking detour, but I think more what you just said. Because I'm a person, I'm just anti-academics, and my mind goes everywhere, you know. That's why I'm doomed to be an artist, otherwise to be a scientist, I think. But I do think, I want to make a good example, because, for example, like these kind of imagery, because I did them with the program called PIMO. I think many students, biology students, chemist students, they use this program to look at a molecule. It's a program that you open on your window that is 3D. It shows all the parts in different computer rendering styles. So this is the one of the styles. And like each of the board, it's an atom. So then, and they are made with possibly crystallography, these type of technology. That's why they are very precise. And they represent the actual molecule in the body in a very precise way, but it's artificially based on the form that you can study it, you can look at it. So the actual molecule would not look like that in our body, in our cell. But these representations, they are so real and so true at the same time, but they are not the actual truth of the actual molecule in the body, but both are the truth. So then by looking at that, you have to add a lot of efforts and ingredients to imagine what is the real thing is. You feel like you can reach there because this is so precisely, so well made. So it facilitates you to reach there, and you think you can, but at the same time you're also not there because you can never actually see it. It's not in your visual, but at the same time you see this. So it's nearly magic, it plays with you. So the detour is naturally there because of the fact of those. So that's also why I'm interested in those scientific representations and methodologies, is because it goes so well with my detour way of thinking and approaching to the so-called final shape. The final shape is not final, it's just, it's a bug, it's a yeah. So detour is a bug, but you can, it's what you have. Yeah, you can't avoid it, so.
Would you say, Ron, there's also universal language for art, given that there's a universal language for science?
I think the universality in art exists on in the communication of what we speak. It's not about agree or disagree, but it's about you cannot really, it's the same as you cannot really nail down a feeling, you cannot really describe the feeling unless you use other content. Say, let's say, I feel really sad, but I cannot really describe you unless I start to tell you the story where I feel sad. But the story itself is not really your feeling, it's just the trigger or the preference of your feeling. So yeah, then you can talk about that, and there is a common universal language in that, I think. But it's not about agreement, it's about gather together, I would say. That's, in that sense, maybe that's different than science. But in science, I think it has that too. You need speculation, you need fiction to get to the final agreement.
Well, I think something else that's important to realize is that although we have maybe some means of communication or using some kind of symbols, we should also realize that many of them, or all of them, are dynamic, so to say. Because also the language of chemistry has evolved over the years, right? If you remember your kindergarten chemistry lessons or whatever, then there was a stick and ball, and then there was a Rutherford model, and then later we came to the Pauling bond model, and it all evolved at one point in these approximations, and we try to refine them over and over again. And the same is true for our language, right? The language decades, centuries ago was different from nowadays. So we adapt to certain knowledge, to adapt to new influences, and this is something that is common both in the science way, but also in any other dealing with our mind, with arts and influences and texts.
Yeah, so speaking of history, I was thinking of your run that you first started with painting that obviously has such a long history that influences and puts a lot of pressure actually on also on contemporary artists. So I was wondering if how you relate to this history, but also in terms of science, how you build on previous knowledge and how you come to something new.
Okay, I will start. I mean, I really consider myself a two-dimensional person, even though this is the first time in my life ever I made something that occupies a 3D space in a sense that you could walk around and look at it. If it's a 2D, mostly relying on a wall or on a table that you look from one angle. And so, but when I was making them, that they are all made with a laser cutting machine. So they just cut, you make a drawing in the machine, the computer, and the laser cuts it. It's one plate, and you put a stand, and you either look at this way or this way. So then I cut the same shape maybe 20 times, then I glue them together, then there is this kind of fake volume. It's not real volume for me, it's a fake, because I know how I got there. So for me, I think this two-dimensional, this painting imagery background is still very much in all the works. The 3D is just unavoidable consequence of how they all put it together. So in that sense, so I think the history is very much present in me, the painting history. And of course, all the works are textured with heat transferred image, which is 100 times enlarged microscopic chicken skin. So there is, but you wouldn't recognize it because they are all fractured. So there is this paintingly, if you must say, the connection, but I don't want to put painting as high up, but it is really in my soul, but it's in a different deformation in all these works already. So. The history?
Yes, so of course, as there is science history, there have been discoveries and knowledge that has been way before the current scientists that try to discover something new that was not before. And of course, whenever you look back in science, you of course gather knowledge, you know what has been already there. What I try to teach my students always is maybe, of course, gather facts and know about something because it helps you to project somehow, but also always try to put yourself in the situation like Fisher or Einstein or Watson, Crick, Franklin have been when they were close to discovering how DNA or how protein structures look like, because they didn't have a clue. And all of a sudden you begin to realize that once you look back, it's very obvious, but once you are there, it's absolutely not obvious at all. Mm-hmm. And this is something that helps you, in my opinion, understanding the challenge, but also getting sometimes a little bit more comfortable with this challenge. Mm-hmm. And to give it also another spin, because you mentioned knowledge, and this is something that I think really a lot about. Because as a scientist, it's of course important that you know what has been there before. Because as I said, you want to go to something new, and if you work on something that's already known, why do you waste your time? But on the other hand, and you said it so beautifully in your pottery class example there, you have to allow yourself to wonder. You have to allow yourself to to be open to new influences and to reconstruct your point of view. Because if you wouldn't, then you probably wouldn't be able to come up with new revolutionary ideas. And the question that I have in a lot of cases in my mind is, how or in what way can knowledge actually be destructive and counterproductive to this quest of finding something new? Because whenever you have knowledge, you already say, well, this is not possible, I shouldn't go there. But let's face it, the big breakthroughs have been actually there because people did not accept the state of the art, and they directly went there for something that was maybe already too obvious, and then they discovered something groundbreaking. And this is really the essence, and this is something that, to describe a little the challenge that a scientist has, where on the one hand side you can take advantage of history and knowledge and everything that has been before you, but you should not be too suppressed by this knowledge. You should still be able to use your own mind to reassemble something, to ask questions. It's also one of the most important things, to ask questions and to maybe find the new answers.
Maybe looking at that question from an innovation research perspective, like the two terms or the distinction between a radical innovation and a more incremental innovation come to my mind, because that's in the end like the future-oriented rephrasing of your question is not looking into the past, but how new is the future. So a novelty for sure is, in addition to rigor, also one of the elements that is needed for research, but also for everything novel developed. And the interesting thing is a lot of innovation that also brings a lot of sales is incremental innovation. So it's really one thing a bit better. Like the new iPhone is an incremental innovation. And every new iPhone is incremental, but still it's a huge portion of sales of Apple. And that's an incremental innovation. And the second is then, where do these radical innovations come from? And that's exactly what you've been describing, this thing of like more of the same. So look, like just taking history and projecting the same history into future might rather bring us incremental innovations. But the question is, where do we need to switch gears? Where do we need to maybe push our boundaries, look at things from a totally new perspective in order to reach a new level? And interestingly, an art historian has looked at that and also found this pattern in art. So he wrote a wonderful book which is called Old Geniuses and Young Masters and Old Geniuses. And so he found in art that some pieces and some artists were very successful at a very young age. And they were more or less, and he calls them conceptual artists, but actually he says they did incremental innovations. So tiny switch to like art was done. And then there were the ones who did the radical innovations, so the old masters. And as the term tells, they were much older. Sometimes they were even dead when they became successful. Maybe you can give me more artistic examples for that. And in the end, those were the people who dared to really change how art was done, to really, I don't know, invent a new dimension or radically break with everything that has been done before, or being open to find something new. And for me, that is also always when it comes to this question of how important is history, like what kind of newness do we want to achieve and do we need? And I guess both are needed, both are valuable, but we have to keep in mind this radical and this incremental aspect.
Based on all that you've said, I'm quite curious about the influence of systems thinking on your work, especially given that, especially in the academic world, you have silos left and right and center, given the incentives provided in scientific research very often, the journal culture, certain kind of traditions that are being nurtured and incentivized versus others, and I'm just wondering how the arts, or looking at other disciplines, may also help to be more innovative, to go for breakthrough innovations rather than incremental innovations. So, any thoughts on that? Maybe Christian.
Yeah, it can help, but it's as individual as any artist or any scientist. I think it's something where certain people may get inspiration or a new tool or new question from, but it's still the individual that has to, you know, take advantage of it. I sometimes think that the overemphasis of interdisciplinary work can be also, again, a little bit counterproductive, because it can in many cases actually lead to incremental work by saying, oh, I saw it here, maybe it works for me. But on the other hand, having new techniques available, having new tools can be something completely eye-opening, and all of a sudden you realize that certain patterns that we see even assembled here in your work, which may have nothing to do with something that you observe in nature because they are artificially combined, is actually something that is very close to like an intrinsically Alzheimer relevant tau protein is actually assembling in an LLPS fragment in the cell. It looks very similar. So all of a sudden you see these correlations which may be there, and you can say, well, this has been an inspiration of something, but maybe it's just coming out of nowhere. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that these structures are not useful, and they may also help training the next generation of scientists, but in the end it comes down to your own level and your own mix of creativity, how to deal with knowledge, how to ask new questions, how to assemble the right techniques, how to maybe also be gifted in doing certain things in the lab or the computer or to calculate. But it's so individual that these systems and these journals and whatever, they are nothing else than the framework. And although we as scientists may be sometimes viewed as the chemists or the physicists, it's again a bunch of individuals, and this is probably the same with artists.
Yeah, I just want to add in the perspective in the art world, yeah, very much similar, because I think probably for all of us, and for also in other fields, would probably sometimes the work we do is a minus, it's not even plus. Like looking into the history, no one in the field that we could work as a superhero, that I'm just suddenly popped out from the earth and there I go, I do my thing, but then maybe you make exactly the same thing that as Picasso already made, you know, the point is over. So you always have to look at what has been there. Like even today, there's so many artists, there's so many things happening all the time. You know, you could end up making one thing that you have been really getting all the facts checked, that this has not really made yet exactly like the way that you do, but then you do the check, but then take you 2 months to make it, and then when you get a chance to show it, and then there might be 2 other shows popping up more or less the same. But then what do you do about it? You have to accept. But then you understand the point is not that you be the only one that I'm the only one that can use a laser cutting machine. No one else, how dare you, you're copying me. You know, this doesn't make any sense. But it's a common language that I think it's switching the standing point, is switching the perspective of, it's not about you, it's about that there is this commonality, there is this connection, that you are just one letter in a whole sentence, which is, that's where it gets you going. And then seeing that way, I think then you'll be more free. You're not seeing, okay, I shouldn't make this color pink next to color yellow because it's just been done last month. It's not about that. Yeah, just want to add that.
Maybe 3 thoughts. So the first is awareness, the second is inspiration, and the third is focus. So I think awareness, that we are aware of the fact that we are operating in one system, but that there may be other systems around us, and recognizing that we might be in a silo, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but having the awareness that we are is important. Because second, and you were describing that you've been spending hours and months with these laser cutters, which means in order to be focused, you sometimes just need to really dig deep, which means you have to go down the rabbit hole, which is really staying within your boundaries of the system, because you need that intensity, and that needs to be nicely balanced with then zooming out again. And the third thing, which is then inspiration, and like I remember there are some papers where all this started, where the ideas for that papers emerged, and some really started personal experiences that made them then think about certain topic. And I think this is kind of interesting if inspiration takes place, so that one system inspires us, and then we take that thought and take our own tools that we have and try to understand what we've seen there. But the good thing about inspiration, including also how art works, is that there is not this direct combination that I can expect from inspiration a certain outcome. So I'm not entering an exhibition with the expectation that I get inspired, because by definition, inspiration is something that I do not expect. But that is, for me, also in this thinking of systems.
Yeah, so related to this, I'd be curious how you choose your subjects, whether it's in art or in your research. How do you get to the specific topics? Because there's so much around, and of course, the subjects are very complex. So I'd be curious how you choose and what to focus on, basically.
Well, when I start, maybe a mixture between things that, like, maybe it's really also listening to emotions. Like, what am I interested in? So that holds both true for the research work, but also for the work now we do in our company. Like, because in the end we deal with these topics, and we want to work with them for several years. So in the end, it should not only be topics that are somehow worth it from a market perspective, but it should be topics where we somehow feel, I don't know, passion, or at least some, like, we must speak to the heart, not only to the brain. And for that topic I did my PhD on, a lot of people warned me because it was so special, and well, you wouldn't be able to publish it. Well, in the end, I was able to publish it, and that showed me again, like, it's worth trusting your emotions and what you really like, because in the end, that creating a connection. And well, art is wonderfully showing us that art pieces connect to us also on an emotional level, and creating things that create a connection might be a good starting point. But in the end, of course, you have to check also the history and should look to the left and right. But for me, it was always a good starting point. Like, do I feel something in the heart, not only in the brain?
Well, I would say I'm just one of the lucky ones. I never choose my subject, never. Even though I think that they seem to be very particular. But like, for example, I remember the first things that like your distant memory when you maybe 5 years old or something, that when because I grew up in the 80s in China, that my hometown is this super industrial city. So I grew up in the, how do you say, like, we have this attempt of a colonial district, because my city is by the sea and is the door entering Beijing. So the Europeans came, they settled down there, they built a whole city, and in my hometown tried to settle down. So, but then it didn't happen, so they had to go away. So then when the communism moved in, so then they would assign each of those castle-like houses, lord-owned houses, to a mixture of big families. So I grew up in a more communal way, living with so many neighbors. But the walls are peeling off, the whole city looked like a horror movie. So I started just looking at the walls, there are already traces on the wall. So you just leave a pencil to add on, it's like a commenting. So I think since then I never chose to be an artist, just kind of goes with reacting with my environment. And then later on I go, of course I choose to study here, but in terms of subjects, I continue this working with pencils and brushes, and I continue with digging in, and I got a microscope, and I started reading about the eye, and then the eye leads me to these papers, and this paper leads me other things until today. So I feel like this kind of, like a couch potato, just lying there, like, yes, subjects come to me, yes, I go for that. But at the end, you do have to make a decision. So I would say I'm more like a manager, or like decision making, even though it's so hard to make decisions, but that's you have to do it sometimes.
I would say when choosing what to work on, of course there are different elements in there that play a role. One is for sure, I said it already, knowledge, so something that I knew before, but definitely also what you so beautifully combined in your show here as well, emotion. so it's definitely has to do a lot with what I experienced, maybe also certain tragedies that I experienced, or certain losses where I thought maybe this is something that I could work on when thinking about how to cure illnesses and all that stuff. But on the other hand, also just by looking around and reading and being inspired and motivated by other researchers that I listened to and that I found absolutely fascinating to hear about their story and their way of dealing with this challenge of finding something new. So it's a mixture of a lot. And yeah, it's all, in the end, it's of course also always a realization that we have only a small amount of time and a certain amount of resources to do things, how to prioritize things. And then, of course, I'm in the beautiful situation that I'm not sitting there alone on the desk or in the couch potato, which is sort, but I'm surrounded by, right now, by 18 wonderfully gifted young people that had the crazy idea to work with me. And a lot of them bring, of course, new ideas and new experiences. And all of a sudden we realize, hey, when we do this together, we all of a sudden can cure cystic fibrosis or something like that, right? So of course, I haven't cured that yet, but we at least have ideas to go there and to exploit that, to again ask the question and then form an experiment to validate a hypothesis or not. This is then the way towards it.
So let's open up to the audience for some questions. Dirk is very eager to ask. Go ahead.
Yes, I would really like the panelists to elaborate a little bit on an element that has not been touched upon here, and that I think is important for arts, science, and the level of morality. And it's quite clear for someone who is constructing molecules that you could cure illnesses, but could easily also construct something to kill people or produce chemical weapons. An artist, like the artwork behind you, this is a bed frame. It doesn't say whether this is something that if people are sleeping in it, they can produce new life, or whether it destroys life. It's a deathbed. So the aspect of morality in what you do is quite obvious for me. It's so important that you should just elaborate a little bit on it. And just another example, if this is correct, what I've heard, if you ask ChatGPT to create a new molecule for a chemical weapon, then it comes up with 5,000 opportunities within 2 minutes. And so there's an element of science, and artificial intelligence that should also be reflected in your work. And please tell us more about your views on it.
Of course, I can also start here because I guess you also asked the scientist here. This is, of course, something that we always deal with, and that's, of course, not difficult to answer. It's a mixture between awareness, again, knowledge, and realizing that, certain aspects can, or certain questions can have different results that in the first you may also not anticipate, or that only by looking again at this from another point of view can also have completely different consequences. For me, one of the most clear examples on this is what the Haber-Bosch process really led to. So Fritz Haber was a German chemist who worked here in Berlin, in Dahlem, and he pretty much discovered the reaction how to make out of nitrogen gas and hydrogen gas ammonia. And this was pretty much the reason why the world population would explode, because all of a sudden we had access to fertilizers to grow the crops and to pretty much allow that people didn't have to starve anymore. On the other hand, the same molecule allowed the war weapon industry to make dynamite. So you see that although the process may have some good aspects, it's in the end not in the hands of the scientists to use this, but of society. And the element, I said, awareness, that one has to realize there is that the scientist we are not on our own. We are part of society. We are part of society in being dependent on other resources, depending on the infrastructure, but also depending on the people to use this, to interface with it. And you may argue this is now an easy way out for me. I produce it and then you take it or run or not. But this is really the relation of it. I'm as much a human being who is frightened about some of the things that may be produced right now somewhere that I don't know what it is. On the other hand, I may be the one who is able to develop a cure to something where this, whatever has been developed, is not harmful anymore. So it's a dynamic process, and I just mentioned some of the elements that I important.
I think in terms of morality in art, I think what I can imagine that it must lie in the nature of art, that is a communicative thing, that we are, as an artist, that I could imagine that everything exists in the world could be potentially a subject that you talk about. So when you talk about something, that why you talk about it, and you're not just speaking to yourself, you're talking about it with someone else, or not necessarily that I'm only looking for people who agree with me. You can be not agreeing, you can be having all your feelings and opinions about it, but it's about the subjects are existing because there are all kinds of things existing in this world. So everything potentially would be talked about by someone, even just between you and your other friend. No one else in the world talk about it. But that is a part of the humanity that you two are speaking about, that something. So, so in art, every subject is spoken about, it's there out to be thought about, to be reflected upon. I think that commonality, that open space itself, it's perhaps what I can imagine morality is. So that's why I always think there shouldn't be any forbidden subjects in art. And for example, if an artist is speaking about, I don't know, a subject that could potentially hurt many people's feelings, but it doesn't mean that you speak about it, you are agreeing with the damaging perspective of it. You are just possibly in a neutral position as a reporter, as a one that bringing up the subject. No, it doesn't matter how painful it can be, but the subject is a part of our reality that should not be neglected. So I think in that sense, of course, it's about how you talk about it, not intentionally to hurt people, but to take it as an opportunity to speak about it. So I think that's where artist works are, and that's where, yeah, morality is lying in that case.
Maybe a quick example from the work we do in the field of future skills. Like we try to make those topics of responsibility explicit. So when we talk about future skills, we include topics such as long-term orientation, such as questions of what is like the impact on other people. Do you oversee effects that you have? And we try to push that these questions have to be asked, and so to make these, that criteria for making decisions. And well, we are convinced that for future-ready organizations, these questions have to be asked, because like there's response in responsibility, so we really challenge people to be ready to ask and answer these kind of questions.
Any other questions? The front row has an advantage. No, there is nobody else at the moment.
I mean, we're talking about arts and science, and we had your example of how you took part in a clay workshop. I was wondering, and I guess the question goes to Martin and Christian, is it the other way around? Have you ever collaborated with artists on a problem statement that you have defined and given the problem statement to an artist?
So I didn't do it as part of a research project, but I did once a workshop together with a ballet dancer, and that workshop was about basically founding a new association, and the artist was just there observing, and whenever the process got stuck, he made an intervention to more or less show us, like hold us a mirror in front of us to feel where we are in the process. And Then after 15 or 20 minutes, we continued the workshop, but this helped us to reach a new level. But as I said, this was now part of not of a research project, but of an actual workshop.
Not necessarily in the techniques that we use, because many of them are actually dangerous, because you could cut yourself or something explodes also, but it's still in a lot of cases some training that you need. But certainly in the way of, let's say, identifying questions is maybe not the right approach, but I of course talk a lot with artists in a way, because whenever I come to a show, whenever I meet somebody, my experience is that when I say I'm a chemist, it's like, wow, really? This is something that is, in my opinion, is quite common. It's not that unique, but to make new molecules and to actually understand some of the material is something that's actually then in a lot of cases very interesting for them. And then for me, the immediate question that I ask back is then, so what do you know about it? And I, for myself, realize a lot of my limitations, also what you described as knowledge gaps, when I talk with them and try to communicate what my central question is and what my hypothesis and what my current research is about. And when I'm at a dinner party and when I'm asked this question, so what do you actually work on? I actually come up almost every single time with a new type of image or a new type of story. And I realize when I tell this, how limited I am in my understanding, that I still haven't figured out the whole problem. So it's in a way not maybe direct that now the dancer is all of a sudden making that circle that could be made in the molecule, but that in our interaction it brings back to me the notion how limited and how open that particular thing is that I'm still working on, if that makes sense.
Just as a follow-up, the reason why I'm asking is because, Ron, I was very impressed with you describing how you had an experience of something and then you dove deeper and deeper and deeper into understanding the technology behind. And so basically you are using tools that don't come natural to an artist, but you're using tools that come natural to a scientist. And so my question, I guess, goes towards, when we talk about future skills of scientists and we talk about art and science collaboration, how could scientists use, and young scientists in the education process, be educated to use artistic tools in order to solve your problems and dive into it in a similar way as you have? I think that would be really interesting to explore. How did you work around with scientists? Turn it the other way around, or did you do this all on your own in self-study?
No, I never worked with scientists. In fact, I never visited any scientific facilities. I would love to. I mean, I applied several, residencies that relate to that. And I think because I don't make this big stuff, and I didn't get any, but that's fine. And I do have curiosities, like speaking to scientists and really go to lab to solve the mystery, to really actually see what they do. I mean, I watch so many videos, I listen to podcasts all the times, in a fragmented way of learning, and I actually use those softwares, even though I go study the things like N-terminals, C-terminals, ligands, these terms, I have no idea, but just because I need to know what this molecule is, I need to go through that. So it's almost like a video game process for me, so I have to learn them. I was forced to learn them by the fact of how knowledge is structured, about the actual thing that knowledge is representing or studying of. So that obviously opens the interest of knowing the actual people who are actually working on that. So I'm very much interested, but I don't know what my expectation would be when I go to visit them. I wouldn't want them to explain to me what this means, what that means, but perhaps of what their relation to what they do, their preference in what they do. So that, I guess that's my interest. So.
Sounds like Christy needs to reallocate some of his budget towards an art residency at the Leibniz Research Institute.
Resonant program.
Hint, hint.
Sure, come along. No, something that I maybe also want to add to is maybe also something not that you might look for right now, but in the end, when I talk about science, it also may sound very glorious because we discovered this and this, but of course it's also a story of failures, right? It's also stories of disappointment, and it's a story of something that we tried, and then all of a sudden we had a complete different outcome by re-looking at it. Maybe we discovered something new. But I think this is something where we as scientists can definitely learn from other fields in general when hoping about a certain process, a process in how certain work develops, materializes, because this is also what we see here. And this is something that when it comes to education, I think it is also the way that you teach not only be influenced by the absolute glorious superstars, but also by how to deal with certain challenges and how to, something breaks. Probably this was, it is not the only things that you made, right? You made several of them. So, and finally you arrive at the ones that really worked for you. And it's the same way in a scientist. And I think this is something, although it's not really inherent to the technique that we are using, but where in the approaches, I think we can learn a lot from each other. And maybe this is also something that you try to describe as your pottery story, right? So you start dealing with objects, and by getting experience with this particular process, maybe you can draw some analogy, inspiration for your own work.
And maybe as a quick add-on, so that workshop was actually part of a fellowship program that had the aim of bringing artistic thinking to business and law students. So I would even go one step further and say artistic thinking and what you mentioned is how to deal with failure, resilience, also the idea of thinking in utopias and of daring to push boundaries because thinking of there could be a better future. These are all things that not only scientists, but that society utterly needs. And art on top also is appealing to the senses, and it's not only like delivering us these answers. So I guess this really bringing art away from just it's nice looking at it, but giving art that, trusting that art has a power to give to us is something that not only science but also society benefits from. So and I guess that's also one of the mission statements that you hopefully have as Arts and Nature Social Club.
More questions? It's a lady. Phoebe?
Yes, I have a question for actually all three of you, really. We lived through an incredible time during Corona, where basically we were stuck at home because of this invisible virus. And it was in the news, day in, day out for years, really. And I just wonder, has that time, do you think, shaped how science, how science communication is taking place, how the general public sees this invisible world, the microscopic, which had so much power over all of us? Has there been a shift that you sense? And I mean, obviously we live in an age of misinformation as well today, but do you think the Corona period has shifted our human perception of this invisible world? And what can artists do? I mean, I think you're doing this some of yourself as well, but question perhaps to all three of you.
Well, I think it has. What did change is that people suddenly had more time. So that meant that that focus I was talking about, help people to maybe dig deeper into topics. And I was once talking to a publisher, and he said, well, so many people are sending now manuscripts for books because everybody discovered that they now have the time to write them. And so I guess that was one aspect. Maybe I'll leave it to that. We have more questions and more answers.
I I think it definitely changed in the art scene that in relation to science or anything, or any subject or subject for art, that it seems to be more cold, more objective. I think the corona changed that in artists' point of view, that is becoming more emotional, becoming more, not necessarily your personal connection to science, adding your personal connection to science, but more that your perspective to it is different, because we are post-pandemic era that I also feel like, especially in Berlin, perhaps people are becoming more like a community-based, less individual. I mean, personally, Corona, I'm not making artwork post-COVID, but there's like important aspect in this show that someone I know very well in the Corona that he got very sick. So then, and then he's recovering from this whole thing that's called the long COVID. So then, when I was reading all this, the protein in the muscles, that he actually lost the function of that his body stopped producing energy in the mitochondria, that his muscle could not contract, so he could not move that much. So reading those subjects used to be, I mean, pre-pandemic was something very fascinating and interesting for me. It was very bright. But after the situation, knowing this person, I just could not help myself that this thing becomes like a horror movie. When I every day looking at the 3D rendering of this shape, it really hurts me. And then later on, then something like there was a snowy day that his eyes got really sensitive to snow, so he's the rhodopsin, the molecule in the eye, which is in the show, that stopped connecting to photon in the light. So he had to be blinded for almost half a year. So that situation, obviously, exactly when I was reading deeper about this protein. So this protein themselves animated themselves towards me in a very tacky way. I just cannot be neutral to them. But that's I cannot separate this personal experience to what we do, because it is the same universe that as a person. So I would say that to so many other people in different degrees and different ways relating to post-pandemic situation. So that somehow get us more together. So emotional representation, it's maybe a tool to get somewhere for yourself. Like there's A to B in you, or there's A to B between you and other people. I think that's also a bit of the point in this exhibition as well.
Yeah, to answer your question, I think the Corona pandemic changed fundamentally in almost every single aspect of life that I can think of, from economy to science, from sociology to dealing with news. I mean, there's almost no way that I would say that was not impacted. But the thing that I think about the most when we also think about what we deal about today and think about how science, art, and maybe perception interfered, what is for me most striking what role scientists had in that, because they went from heroes to sex symbols to yeah, you know who I talk about, to traitors, to criminals, to everything. Right? And it's hard, and on the other hand, it's probably also the only pandemic where we all witnessed that while confronting with the uncertain and all the fear, all of a sudden there was a hope, then there was actually a solution, then there was another solution, then we all of a sudden could go out again, then not. So it was like also a sad horror story, like no, everything, right? And it's just baffling, and we will always look back at this time, I think, as in a nucleus of certain events that spanned all aspects of life. But yeah, I always look about this about a certain aspect, a certain point of view that just came.
I think there were a couple more questions. So, the table is not long enough. If you can start maybe being recorded.
Yeah,
that's why it's helpful to have a microphone.
First off, thank you for sharing your work. Really nice. I was wondering how closely you three work together like in the whole thought process? Was it only you and you like consulted them at some point, or was it nothing at all? It was just you? Actually, no question there.
This one works.
Yeah.
It's been sitting there. Okay. Well, I mean, I guess nowadays many artists work collaboratively and also across disciplines. But in my case, I'm just me, and I was working in a laser cutting workshop 4 months straight. So I was caught up on a laser planet. I always say to my friends, and so I'm also an artist that work very intensively. So that's the situation. I think you can sense the intensity in the works, and so it's like. But that's what I found art is interesting. That is, you can never lie with it. I mean, either a music piece or a visual thing that is so. It's just honest, and you always can find what you've been through the making process. So. Yeah, just me. Well, but then the beautiful pedestals are made by the Plan B crew, so they're great. So.
Just come here. Great.
First, thank you for sharing your nice thoughts, and just excuse in advance for my English, but I'm trying to express what I thought. Actually, I have a question for Martin Schwemmle, Professor. Did I pronounce it right? I did fine arts in my bachelor's, and now I'm studying business, so I really could get resonated what you guys think about those two areas. And these days I'm just curious that if entrepreneurs or business industries does really think seriously approaching, like changing their perspective in artistic way or other ways into the business.
So thank you for that great question. Actually, there are two streams of answers. The first is that there's been, like, for 15 to 20 years around design thinking, which is an innovation approach, a mindset, a tool set where a lot of thoughts come from, I would say, artistic thinking. So the design in design thinking is more to design thinking, not about the product design aspect. And the reason why it has been so successful is, and we also did a research project on that, is because it packages that, let's say, radical thought process of art into 6 steps. So this is how businesses somehow get that pill of disruption, but in short portions, combined with the security of a process. So that is one thing, and that now the buzzword of design thinking is more or less now, like they have new terms now, but actually that was one example of how, well, topics included there are like empathy, are prototyping, so really working with your hands and building products to test. So that, I would say, was one example of how at least a portion of artistic thinking went into organizations. Regarding the second question, some organizations really do have artists in residence or kind of certain programs. But now here's the complex thing about art, and we talked about that already a bit. In my view, the businesses want answers to problems. Art might give you a solution, but it might give you also more problems. So that makes art, on the one hand, so beautiful. But on the other hand, you cannot just say, okay, art solves you the problem, because whenever art would be such, well, no, purposeful is not, but like such utilitarian, it would not be longer art, I would say. So I guess this is why it's, on the one hand, there's so much potential value in combining the both, but it makes it so hard because you cannot guarantee the success. But that's, like, by definition, a part of the art. But what would you do if you go into business? Like, if an organization would invite you, would you be interested in joining them for half a year? And if so, what would you do in there?
Yeah, I'd be interested, but I'm afraid I probably make the problem more complicated. I'm one of those. Definitely 200% I'm one of those. But it doesn't mean you are doomed there. You know, you can take what you can, as you say. It's also, at the end, possibly about decision making rather than facing all the problem in front of you. So, yeah, but definitely I'll go the one steered situation, I think. Yeah.
So I think with this we could easily talk for another hour, 2 hours, etc. But I think we'll have another hour at least to mingle and talk. And I've been wondering how to summarize this very deep and wide discussion. And the word that comes to mind is really curiosity. I think, if anything, then it's really curiosity that drives all of you. And I'm impressed by Rand's self-taught ambition to dig deep in the scientific field and be inspired and do what you've done and do your laser cuts with the same discipline and rigor. And also the other two speakers, Martin and Christian, how you've explored your very fields and also looked left and right and inspired by in different ways. And so I'm walking away with a lot of new insights, and yeah, for me it was very enriching. So thank you all for the discussion, and thank you again, Galeria Plan B for co-hosting in your beautiful space. And if you have any questions to me, my name is Joerg Geier. I didn't mention my own name earlier, about Arts and Nature Social Club. Feel free to let me know, and I'm sure Sorana has also a few more words to conclude.
It's mostly a thank you. First of all, of course, to the speakers, Christian, Rad, and Martin. It was a pleasure to have you here, and thank you for this exciting conversation. And then, of course, thank you for everyone for coming and for the extraordinary questions. I hope, and I'm also speaking in name of the whole team, to see you again. You're always welcome to visit us, whether to see Rand's show again or our upcoming exhibition, which will open beginning of May, also exhibition of Serban-Chiorean. And last but not least, thank you, Joerg, and the entire Arts and Nature Social Club team. Yeah, we're happy to collaborate, and we hope it was a pleasant evening for everyone. Thank you.